Ethan always believed he was destined for something greater. He had big dreams, just like everyone else. He wanted to be successful, to build something meaningful, and to make his parents proud. But unlike others who chased their dreams, Ethan stayed in the same place mentally and physically. Why? Because every time an opportunity showed up, Ethan had a reason to pass it by. I would have joined that competition, but I didn't have enough time to prepare. I was going to start that business, but the economy is too unstable right now. I wanted to take that course, but I didn't have the right tools. Excuses. That's all they were. And slowly those excuses became his comfort zone. They wrapped around him like a blanket, keeping him warm, yes, but also keeping him stuck. People around him started to notice. His friends who once encouraged him eventually stopped asking what he was working on. His parents, once proud of his dreams, started looking at him with quiet concern. And Ethan, somewhere deep inside, felt the emptiness of his own inaction. One day, while sitting on a wooden bench near the village market, Ethan met a traveler. The man was old, dressed simply, with eyes that held a calm wisdom. His name was Mr. Clark. They struck up a conversation. Mr. Clark listened patiently as Ethan poured out his heart, his dreams, his failures, and yes, his excuses. When Ethan was done talking, Mr. Clark smiled gently. He said, "Ethan, let me tell you something. Excuses are the enemy of progress." Ethan looked confused. Mr. Clark continued, "You think your reasons are valid, but all they do is stop you. Every excuse you make is a brick in a wall you're building between you and your future." Ethan stayed silent. The words hit harder than expected. Mr. Clark pointed to a child across the street selling hand-woven baskets. "See that boy? He doesn't have much, but every day he shows up here to sell his baskets. He doesn't say it's too hot. He doesn't complain that people don't always buy. He's doing his part." Ethan nodded slowly. Mr. Clark looked at him and said, "The truth is, there will always be something to blame. The weather, the people, the timing. But none of those things are stronger than your will to try, unless you let them be." That evening, Ethan walked home with a heavy heart. He realized that every excuse he had ever made had stolen a piece of his future. Not because the situation was impossible, but because he didn't try. He remembered the times he was so close to starting something, but allowed doubt and blame to take over. And for what? Safety? Comfort? Excuses may protect you from failure, Ethan thought, but they also block you from growth. From that day, Ethan made a promise. No more excuses. If something went wrong, he would learn. If things got tough, he would adapt. If he failed, he would try again. He started small. He woke up early to study. He began saving money to buy tools for his dream project. He asked for help when he needed it instead of saying he was alone. Bit by bit, things started changing. Not because the world changed, but because Ethan did. He no longer waited for perfect conditions. He no longer looked for someone else to blame. He started showing up for his own life. Every day, he reminded himself, excuses are the enemy of progress. The more he acted, the more he achieved. People noticed. His parents smiled again. His friends started asking for advice. Even Mr. Clark, who has since traveled on, would be proud. Years later, when someone asked Ethan the secret to his success, he didn't mention money or luck or talent. He said, "I stopped giving excuses." That's when everything began. And truly, that was the moment his life turned around. Ethan stood in the middle of the field, the wind brushing against his face as he stared at the mountains in the distance. The sky was cloudy and rain had been falling on and off all morning. He had planned to start jogging every morning to build discipline and improve his health. He told himself the night before, no matter what, I'll begin tomorrow. But now, looking up at the gray clouds, he whispered, maybe not today. The weather isn't good. And with that, he walked back inside. He didn't jog that morning. He didn't jog the next either. One thing or another kept coming up. A little rain, a late night, a sore muscle. There was always a reason to wait for the perfect time. But deep inside, Ethan started noticing a pattern. He wasn't just avoiding jogging. He was avoiding everything that required effort. He wanted to learn coding, but said he couldn't because he didn't have a fast laptop. He wanted to start a side business, but said he'd wait until he had more money. He wanted to speak better English, but said there was no one to practice with. And just like that, his dreams stayed dreams. One day, Ethan met Mr. Clark again near a rocky hillside. They walked up the hill in silence. At the top, Mr. Clark pointed to a tree growing between two massive rocks. The tree wasn't tall, but it stood firm, its roots gripping tightly to the cracks in the stone. Mr. Clark said, "Do you see that tree?" Ethan nodded. That tree had no rich soil, no shelter, no clear path to grow. But it didn't wait for the perfect condition. It took what it had and grew anyway. Ethan was quiet. Mr. Clark continued, "Most people wait their whole lives for perfect conditions, but life doesn't work that way. You have to grow where you're planted." The words struck Ethan deep in his chest. He looked at the tree again. It didn't wait for rain. It didn't ask for better soil. It just tried. And because it tried, it survived. Ethan suddenly saw his own excuses for what they were: a delay, a shield, a trap. All this time, he had been waiting for something magical to happen, a perfect day, a sign from the universe, or someone to lift him up. But nothing changes if nothing moves. And he wasn't moving. That night, Ethan sat alone and asked himself, what if I stopped waiting for perfection? What if I just started with what I have? So he did. The next morning, he jogged despite the drizzle. His shoes weren't new, his legs hurt, but he ran anyway. He took his old laptop, downloaded free materials, and began learning coding. It was slow, sometimes frustrating, but he kept going. He practiced English with free videos online. He read out loud, even if he made mistakes. Day by day, step by step, things started to shift. Ethan no longer looked for perfect moments. He created them. He turned his small room into a study zone. He turned silence into his classroom. He turned doubt into fuel. The more he acted, the more he realized how much he could do, even with limited resources. People began to notice the change. "You've become so focused," one friend said. "I don't know how you do it," another added. But Ethan smiled quietly. He knew the secret. He stopped waiting. He understood that success doesn't need a perfect stage. It just needs a willing heart. That tree on the hill, it stayed with him. It reminded him that even in the hardest conditions, growth is possible if you have the will. Years later, when Ethan opened his first tech business, he placed a photo of that tree on his office wall. Below it, a simple line: "Success does not depend on perfect conditions." And every time he faced a challenge, he remembered. He didn't wait. He acted. Because now he knew trying is more powerful than waiting. Ethan sat on the steps of the old village library, watching people go about their day. Children ran down the path with books in their hands. Shopkeepers set up their stalls with energy and focus. Elderly folks walked slowly, chatting warmly, enjoying the air. And there he was, still thinking about why he hadn't started anything yet. He sighed deeply. He thought about all the plans he had made, all the dreams he once held with burning passion, but each one had ended the same way: an excuse, a delay, a reason not to try. And it wasn't that he didn't care. He cared deeply. He just didn't believe he could do it. Not yet, not now, not like this. He told himself, "I'm not ready, I'm not good enough, I need more time." But deep inside, he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to push him forward. That's when he saw Mr. Clark approaching from across the street. The old traveler greeted him with a warm smile. "Deep in thought again, Ethan?" Mr. Clark asked. Ethan chuckled nervously. "I just feel stuck," he replied. "I want to do things. I want to be someone, but I don't know how." Mr. Clark sat beside him. After a long pause, he said, "Ethan, can I tell you a secret?" Ethan nodded. "Sometimes," Mr. Clark said, "a single lesson, just one, can change your entire life." Ethan looked curious. "Just one?" Mr. Clark smiled. "Yes, one idea, one moment of realization, one shift in how you see the world. That's all it takes." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. He opened it to a page with a quote that read, "What you do today is more important than what you plan for tomorrow." Mr. Clark continued, "We get caught up in thinking we need to change everything all at once. We keep waiting for that big moment of transformation. But real change begins with a small lesson deeply felt." Ethan read the quote again and again. He felt something move inside him. It wasn't just words. It was truth. He had been planning his life, talking about dreams, preparing in his head for the perfect day, but never truly starting. That night, Ethan went home and opened an old journal he hadn't touched in years. He flipped through the pages filled with dreams, goals, and unfinished ideas. And on the last page, he wrote, "The lesson I needed, start now, don't wait." From that moment, he began applying the smallest lessons to his life. When he struggled to stay focused, he didn't scold himself. He simply learned to take breaks in return. When he failed to understand something new, he didn't quit. He sought a new method to learn. And when fear whispered that he wasn't enough, he remembered that even a tree needs time to grow. Every day, he found one lesson to carry forward. It might have come from a mistake, it might have come from something he read or a story someone told him, but he learned. And more importantly, he applied. Over time, Ethan became known in the village, not for how much he achieved, but for how he changed. People admired his discipline, his calm, and his quiet confidence. Young people began coming to him for advice. "How did you become like this?" they asked. He would smile and say, "One lesson at a time." And sometimes he would pull out that same notebook Mr. Clark had shown him. He had copied the quote inside and added many more. He called it his book of growth. And on the first page, he had written, "A single lesson can transform a life if you let it." Years later, when Ethan stood on stage at a university to share his journey, he didn't tell a grand story full of drama or huge turning points. He simply said, "I was a young man full of excuses and fear. But then one day someone reminded me that I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to learn something, anything, and apply it. So I did, and I never stopped." That one lesson had changed his life. And maybe, just maybe, it could change someone else's too. Ethan walked along the narrow dirt road leading out of the village. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden light over the hills. He had a bag slung over his shoulder, not heavy with books or tools, but filled with thoughts. Thoughts of all the moments he had stepped back instead of forward. All the chances he let slip because he didn't feel confident enough. And all the fears he dressed up as logic. He was thinking about why he kept making excuses. What was it really? Why did he always find a reason not to try? Then, like a wave, it hit him. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't time. It wasn't resources. It was fear. Fear of failing. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of giving everything and still falling short. And because he didn't want to face those feelings, he covered them with excuses. "I'll try later. I don't have the tools. People like me can't do that." But every excuse was just a mask for fear. As he kept walking, Ethan saw a boy playing with a kite on the edge of the field. The wind wasn't strong. In fact, it was barely there, but the boy kept running, lifting the kite high, smiling even as it dipped again and again. Ethan watched in silence. After a while, he approached the boy. "Why do you keep trying if there's no wind?" Ethan asked. The boy grinned and said, "Because sometimes you have to run faster than the fear that it won't fly." Ethan blinked. That simple sentence hit him like lightning. Sometimes you have to run faster than your fear. He sat under a tree nearby and thought hard. Every time he hesitated, it wasn't because he was lazy, it was because he was scared. But fear is tricky. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It says, "Not today." It says, "You're not ready." It says, "What if they laugh?" And slowly, quietly, it steals your courage. That afternoon, Ethan returned home and took out a piece of paper. At the top, he wrote, "What am I afraid of?" He listed everything. Fear of failure, fear of being mocked, fear of disappointing his parents, fear of not finishing what he started. Then he took another piece of paper and wrote, "What will I lose if I keep listening to fear?" He wrote down things like my dream, my self-respect, my future. That list was even longer. That's when it became clear his fears might be real, but they were not worth more than his future. So he decided that day he would no longer let fear speak louder than effort. He started small. He sent an email to someone he admired, something he had been too nervous to do for months. He joined an online group to practice his speaking skills, even though he was terrified of making mistakes. He began sharing his ideas with friends, even if his voice shook. And every time he faced a fear, he reminded himself, I'm not doing this to be perfect. I'm doing this to grow. Days turned into weeks, and slowly something shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him because he had replaced fear with movement. And with every step he took, fear lost power. People started noticing a new fire in Ethan's eyes, a quiet strength, a humble confidence. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. Why? Because he spoke from experience. He knew what it meant to be afraid and to try anyway. Years later, a young man came to Ethan and asked, "How did you become so fearless?" Ethan smiled and said, "I didn't become fearless. I just stopped making fear my excuse." And that made all the difference. Underscore, 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 underscore. Ethan sat by the riverbank, watching the water glide past the rocks. It was peaceful there, a quiet place, where the world seemed to pause for a while. But inside his mind, it wasn't peaceful at all. He was remembering every mistake he had made, the times he quit before trying, the moments he let someone else decide his worth, the friendships he lost because he couldn't show up, the exams he failed because he didn't prepare, the trust he broke because he wasn't honest with himself. All of it flooded back like the current of the river beside him. He lowered his head and whispered to himself, "Maybe I'm just not meant to succeed." But then he looked at the water again. No matter what rock stood in its way, the river kept flowing. It didn't stop because of a rough patch. It didn't turn around and go back. It found a way over, around, through, and he kept moving forward. That's when Ethan realized something powerful. His past was not his prison. It was a part of his journey, a lesson, a chapter, not the whole story. He stood up, wiped the dirt from his hands, and said out loud, "I am not my past. I am what I do next." From that moment on, he no longer allowed his old failures to hold him back. Instead, he used them to fuel his determination. He took responsibility for his choices. He apologized to those he hurt. He forgave himself for the things he didn't know then, and he gave himself permission to grow. Day by day, he proved to himself that his future wasn't controlled by his yesterdays. It was built by his todays. Every action, every effort, every small decision to rise when it was easier to stay down. People around him started saying, "You've changed." Ethan smiled because he had, not because he erased his past, but because he accepted it and chose to move forward anyway. Underscore, 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 underscore. Ethan once believed motivation was like a spark, something magical that came on its own. He waited for it. He waited and waited on cold mornings, on long afternoons, and quiet nights, but it didn't come. And so nothing happened. Then one morning, as he sat sipping tea, he watched his neighbor, Mr. Williams, sweeping the street in front of his shop. Every single morning, like clockwork, whether it rained or shined, Mr. Williams showed up. One day, Ethan asked him, "How do you stay so motivated?" Mr. Williams laughed and replied, "Motivation? I don't wait for it. I just do what needs to be done. And once I start, motivation shows up." That sentence changed everything. Ethan realized he had been waiting for inspiration, waiting for energy, waiting for the right mood, but that was the trap. Motivation doesn't come first, action does. So he tried it. He set a time and worked for 10 minutes. Even when he didn't feel like it, he stood up and did 10 push-ups, even though his mind wanted to stay in bed. He read one page of a book, even when he felt tired. And the most amazing thing happened. Once he started, he kept going. The effort created energy. The motion created momentum. He didn't need to feel motivated to begin. He just needed to begin. From then on, Ethan stopped relying on motivation. Instead, he focused on habits, routines, systems. And once those were in place, progress followed. Not because he always felt like it, but because he chose to act even when he didn't. He understood a truth most people never learn. Motivation doesn't find you, you create it. And that lesson became one of the greatest gifts of his life. Ethan sat in a small workspace, staring at the half-finished project in front of him. He had started it 2 weeks ago, full of energy, full of excitement, but somewhere along the way he got stuck. He looked at the details he hadn't finished. The colors weren't right. The words didn't feel perfect. So he stopped, and just like that, another great idea sat unfinished. Later that day, he met Ava, a local artist known for her simple yet powerful paintings. He asked her, "How do you finish so many pieces? Don't you ever worry about making them perfect?" Ava smiled and replied, "If I waited for perfection, I'd never finish anything." She pointed to one of her paintings. "Do you see this?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's done. And because it's done, it can grow, it can inspire, it can reach others." That night, Ethan thought deeply. He realized he was paralyzed by the idea of being perfect. He thought everything had to be flawless before it could be shared with the world, but perfection had become his excuse. From that day forward, he made a promise to himself. Done is better than perfect. He allowed himself to be messy, to make mistakes, to grow in public. And every time he finished something, no matter how small, he celebrated progress. One line written, one idea shared, one task completed. And slowly, all those small wins added up. People began to notice his work, not because it was perfect, but because it was consistent. It was honest. It was human. Ethan learned that perfection is an illusion, and chasing it only leads to delay. But progress leads to purpose, to momentum, to results. And in the end, that's what moves the world forward. Underscore, 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 underscore. Ethan had a rough. Things didn't go as planned. His team missed a deadline, his presentation wasn't approved, and worst of all, he felt misunderstood. When he got home, he was frustrated. He wanted to blame everyone else. If they had helped me more, if the team wasn't so slow, if the manager had listened. But deep down, he knew blaming others wouldn't fix anything. So he sat down and asked himself a hard question. What could I have done differently? At first, it stung, but slowly he saw the truth. He could have communicated earlier. He could have double-checked the details. He could have stayed calm during the meeting instead of reacting. Taking responsibility wasn't easy. It required courage. But it gave him something powerful, control. Because when you blame others, you give away your power. But when you take responsibility, you take that power back. The next day, Ethan apologized to his team. He admitted where he went wrong. And to his surprise, they respected him even more, not because he was perfect, but because he was honest and because he owned his role. That week, things started to shift. His team worked better together. Trust grew. And Ethan felt lighter, stronger. He no longer waited for others to change. He focused on what he could do, and that made all the difference. Responsibility became his strength, not a burden, but a blessing, because it showed he was ready to grow. Underscore, 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 underscore. Ethan used to rely on bursts of energy. He would start strong, full of excitement, but then stop. The energy would fade, the motivation would vanish, and the dream would be delayed again. Until one day he met Leo, a former athlete who now trained young kids. Leo said, "Success isn't about feeling good every day. It's about showing up, especially when you don't feel like it." That stuck with Ethan. So he created a simple plan, nothing fancy, just 10 minutes a day. Every morning he would sit down, focus, and work no matter what. Rain or shine, good mood or bad. Some days were smooth, some were slow. But he showed up day after day, week after week, and something powerful happened. He built discipline. He didn't need to wait for the right time. He had created a habit, a rhythm, a promise to himself. Even when no one watched, he kept his word. And over time, he transformed not just his projects, but his mindset. He began to believe in his own consistency. He trusted his effort. And that discipline opened new doors. People started trusting him. Opportunities came, not because he was lucky, but because he had proven he was dependable. And it all started with one small daily decision: show up. One cold morning, Ethan stood by his window watching the world wake up slowly. His journey had not been easy. There had been early failures, setbacks, lonely nights where self-doubt whispered louder than hope. And yet, through it all, he had kept going. Now, standing there, looking at the rising sun, Ethan thought of one simple truth that changed everything. You are responsible for your own success. Not your teacher, not your friend, not your manager, not even your past. Just you. It was easy to wait for someone to guide him, to wish someone would notice his effort and offer him a big chance. It was easy to believe that success was something given. But the truth, it had to be created, owned, earned. Ethan remembered the time he had waited months for a reply from a company, hoping they'd give him a chance, but nothing came. So instead of waiting, he created his own opportunity. He started a small online project from his room. No funding, no connections, just determination and a belief that if no one would open a door, he'd build his own. Slowly, people began to notice, not because of luck, but because of effort. He realized that blaming the world wouldn't help. Waiting for approval would only delay progress. And depending on others to fix his life gave away his power. So he took it back. He stopped waiting. He started acting, step by step, day by day. And every single time he made progress, it was because he had taken the first move, not someone else. Now, when people asked Ethan the secret to success, he always answered the same way. You have to own it, all of it. The failure, the growth, the outcome. He smiled and added, nobody will do it for you. And that's the best part, because when you succeed, you'll know it was you who made it happen. That's when real strength is born, from ownership, from courage, from action. And Ethan, he chose to stop making excuses and start making history.